Welcome to the Cynical Developer Live. This is the podcast that helps you improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. In this episode, we're talking about why projects fail with Ron Lichty and Mantle. Ron has been developing software for 35 years in everything from small startups to Fortune 500 companies. Ron is also a renowned speaker who has spoken at many conferences and webinars on topics including agile, teamwork, and transformation. Mickey has been developing software for 50 years. His experience includes directing R&D teams around the world and managing multidisciplinary teams to deliver successful products. With managing teams around the world, he brings insight into the challenges of managing software development with diverse staff, working hours, and cultural differences. So welcome both to the Cynical Developer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come and talk to us about this hot topic.
We're talking to you from the West Coast of the United States.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, all the way over to grey and not so sunny North Wales in the UK. I'm pretty dark at the time of recording now.
Yes.
So you've come on at about the right time, really, with some of the talks that we've had recently on the podcast. We've just had a talk with Uncle Bob Martin about Agile. We've got a show coming up which is entitled "Why We Need Architects in a Team." And through the power of podcasting time travel, I've just given 2 talks at developer groups in the UK on why companies are failing at Agile. Now, I'm sure they went amazingly well, because at the moment it's actually 2 weeks away from finishing up giving those talks. So I'm going to just say yes, they went very, very well. Today we're here to talk about why projects fail, and I think that sort of fits in really nicely with those other topics, because it's all about that teamwork and actually in the environment. And a lot of podcasts tend to talk about the technologies and maybe some of the softer skills, and it's what we've done really on here before. So it's nice to take another angle at the industry as well. So we'll get into talking about why projects fail now. And as a developer, surely it's all the QA and the BA and the manager's fault, right?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why projects fail. It can be management, it can be developers, it can be the team. There's a lot of things that contribute, but quite frankly, it usually comes down to the particular environment as to why a project fails. There's not one reason.
That's true. Projects, the upstream part of a project is, first of all, understanding what the right thing to build is, and then secondly, building the right thing right. And projects can fail at any of those steps along the way. I walk into, as a software development management consultant, an agile consultant, I walk into organizations from time to time that don't even have product management, that don't even understand product management. And product management's role is to make sure we build the right things. And surprise, their projects aren't going very well, typically because they're building a lot of stuff, but not necessarily the right stuff. And then, having architecture in place that a foundation of architecture so that we are all together building in the same kind of way. We as developers tend to want to start coding before we start thinking. Start our fingers going and start typing before we've actually thought through a plan. And a little bit of planning sometimes helps.
Yeah, it's definitely something I've been discussing with developers and managers and that quite recently, especially more with developers, because we tend to go into these meetings where we start talking about projects, and before we finish the conversation about the project, we've actually started solutionizing it in our heads already. And as soon as we get out of that meeting room, we want to start coding away, and it's not always the best approach, I gather.
Uh-huh. And one of the rules of thumb that I've that actually Mickey and I put it in our book 7 years ago when Managing the Unmanageable came out. I was happy to realize, because it's really become a mantra for me in the last few years, which is that software development is fundamentally a team sport. And that means that we need to think together as a team about how we build this stuff.
And speaking to why projects fail, I mean, there's lots of reasons why projects fail, but one thing to turn that question around and say, how can you ensure a project will fail? And that is typically if you don't clearly define what it is you're trying to build. If you don't have a good definition of what it is and what it will be when you finish, you will fail.
Yeah. So you talked just then about companies not having product managers and product owners and whatever name you want to give them. Why do you think that that is from a business point of view? Because it's something I've come across quite regularly as well.
Yeah, I think that there's a lack of understanding of building software among business people sometimes, that all we need to do is say something about what we want and wave our hands and it will appear, and probably a lack of understanding of how complex building software, the challenge of building software is.
Sure. So businesses making unrealistic demands, which they seem to do on a regular basis, is maybe, would you say, a naivety on the business's part?
I think that's I very commonly work with organizations of all sizes, but frequently work with startups, and my experience of founders of startups is that they ideate at a rate that's an order of magnitude faster than we can develop. They have a lot of good ideas. The good idea train pulls out every minute.
And that, of course, is one of the dangers there. The appeal of doing new things and shiny new technologies and so forth all contributes to making projects fail if you don't understand exactly what it is you're going to build and what you're going to build it with.
Sure. Yeah, I can definitely attest to shiny object syndrome. It's something I've definitely experienced, and I'm currently heading up an innovation team for one of my clients, and that should hopefully be hopefully it should work towards that feeding of the shiny object syndrome, because I get to work on the nice and shiny and cool new project and do a proof of concept, and yes, does it work? No, it didn't. Right, move on. Or yes, it did. Right, give that to a BAU team. Right, go build that properly, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what steps can people or businesses take really to try and make sure that these projects aren't going to fail?
So I'm going to start with product management, and there's the first thing that occurs to business people when I suggest product management. So let's say they're in the jeans business. If they were Levi Strauss, they would be thinking about, so product managers are the people who figure out how many rivets we put in our blue jeans, and how many pockets, and how many zipper, and what kind of zipper, and that kind of thing. And that is a product manager. It's a product manager of the product. But a technical product manager is the person who figures out how we sell these things, how we build how we build an application that allows our customers to customize their jeans to their needs. And it's a very different skill set, a very different kind of product management. And it's not something that, unless you've been through building software before, you may think about.
One of the problems with software, of course, is that it's so flexible. That's also one of its benefits, because you can make changes and you can do all kinds of things. But that's why I hate to keep coming back to making sure you have a clear definition of what you want done, and then plan and staff it accordingly. It will improve your chances of having a project that's successful.
Yeah, and I think that the planning is quite crucial. If you don't plan, what's the phrase? Failing to plan is planning to fail. And that's something that we talked about in the Agile episode, is that I think a lot of companies that are going through these transformations or attempting to work in an Agile manner, they think that Agile means we don't plan anything at all, and we just run in and build these products, and hopefully they work. Hopefully it's what the client wants, and it's not quite working out for them, I guess.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think there are a lot of gradations of success, a lot of gradations between failure and success, a lot of ways that we can be more effective. I train teams. I've been, as part of my consulting practice, I've been training teams in Agile for the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I found myself helping waterfall teams transform themselves to Agile. These days, I find myself helping Agile teams transform themselves to Agile. There's almost no team these days that doesn't say, "Oh, we're an Agile team." But when you dig into it, you find that there's a real smattering of understanding of Agile, and it's because a third of it's because they've never trained together, they've never been coached together in many cases, and the result of that is that maybe a third of the team has read a book about Agile, but they've all read different books. And a third of the team has come from some other company that said that it did Agile, but it's just like this team. They never trained in it either, and they never thought about it, and they never really aligned on a process that was truly Agile. And then a third of our team is new to Agile, and they're learning from the other 2/3. And the result is a real lack of alignment around a single process, which even if we were doing waterfall and we were that unaligned with each other, we would not be very effective.
Yeah. So we're talking about why projects fail, and as we mentioned, there are many reasons why they fail. But I guess to know if a project failed, you need to really have defined what winning looks like. What is the outcome, and I don't know if you can speak to that, and companies not knowing what a win actually looks like for themselves, really.
Yeah, I think that goes to what Mickey was talking about of having a very clear picture of what it is you're trying to build, and that's what we count on product managers to do in our companies, is to draw us those pictures so that when we build it, we're building the right thing. And for product managers to spend time with customers and test it with customers and confirm with customers that it's actually what they want and what will delight them.
One of the things that Agile has provided is a mechanism so that you don't, try to define the entire project at once, but rather do it incrementally. And that gives you a couple of benefits. First of all, you get to see something along the way, as opposed to waiting 18 months and then seeing that it isn't what you want at all. And the second thing is that you get to adjust the course, if you will, along the way. You may think you need something that's as big as a mountain, and you might find out that it's a molehill is actually okay after all.
Yeah, and I think that one issue that I've seen before is that companies get a little bit scared with the idea of Agile, that you don't have any set dates, but I've still seen developers sort of scared to commit to anything because they know that they're going to get beaten with anything that they do commit to by the business.
So Agile's not about committing to dates. Agile is about measuring our velocity, and velocity is a measure of pace. It's measuring our pace, and then using our pace to look into the backlog to see what it is we'll get done by a certain date. And we can be pretty accurate about our schedule in doing that. But it's not about commitment, because we're always building something new. It's crazy to commit to something that you're building new that you've never seen before, that you don't know how to build it, and say, oh yeah, we'll be done on that date. But we can be pretty close, in my experience, within plus or minus 20%, if we do relative sizing of our backlog and we see that relative size come through the come through our card wall, come through our process, and we can identify what our pace is, which is what velocity is.
Sure. So I guess that working out your velocity is very different from estimating, because we know that the developers are terrible at estimating sizes for tasks.
I think not just developers. I think human beings are very bad at estimating things they've never done before, and we're just guessing at that point. But we are pretty good at being able to say, well, this thing's probably going to be bigger than that one is, and putting relative sizes on things. And then when relative sizes, when we actually have some experience with those relative sizes, that gives us some pretty good insight into how much we can get done.
One of the things that, touching on why projects fail, and it goes back to the premise of our book, Managing the Unmanageable, is it's really not about managing the technology, it's about managing the people. We put a lot of effort into trying to understand exactly how, in our own experience, we manage people successfully. And often, we've worked in a variety of different industries and technologies, and you would think that projects and the techniques you use would be different, but quite frankly, managing people is pretty much alike no matter what you do. Now, software has some subtleties to it, such as one of the problems with software is that it's so intangible. I mean, you have to find ways to try to make it more concrete, to take and be able to measure how you're doing. And that's one of the things that Agile has brought to it. In these sprints, you work for 3 weeks or maybe a month, and at the end of that, you take and demonstrate the progress you've made, so that there's actually something more tangible than just, I put in 3 months, 3 weeks worth of work.
Yes, I think a corollary to what Mickey was just saying about how common the problem is across, whether we're a startup or an enterprise or a medium-sized company, regardless sort of what we're building. 10 years ago, when I began training teams in Agile, and particularly I was working with waterfall teams in those days, I would get asked the question, well, is there some kind of software that Agile's not appropriate for? And I scratched my head and tried to figure out what kind of software that might be. In my programming days, I wrote a fair amount of embedded code, and that was the only kind of code that it occurred to me might be possible. That it might be inappropriate, but it didn't make sense to me because I had written embedded code. It made sense that if we delivered embedded code incrementally, it would make as much sense for embedded code as it does for anything else. And it occurred, and it took me a few years, but I began to realize after a few years that the question was wrong. It's not a kind of software that's not appropriate for Agile. It's an environment, a culture that's not appropriate for Agile. And that culture is micromanagement. Micromanagement is anathema to Agile. In Agile, our goal is to create best teams, to create the kind of teams that developers say, this is the best team I've ever been on. This is a team I love being on. This is a team that I'm just totally part of. This is a team that I step up and really make a difference in. And what happens in micromanagement is it causes developers to step back and put their hands in their pockets and say, okay, so you told me to do that. What do you want me to do next? And it's a very different mindset and a very different culture. And I think micromanagement is truly anathema for Agile.
Yeah, I've definitely worked in those toxic environments where the managers are spoon feeding you all the work. They are helping you in air quotes to get the work done and telling you what to work on and how to work on it.
Yeah, thanks for putting the air quotes around that.
Yeah. It doesn't help because as an Agile team, you really should be self-motivated. You should be self-organizing and picking what works. what needs to be done next. Obviously, with input from product managers and everything like that. But as we said earlier, it's a team game. Software is a team game, and I think that people very much forget that because there is bravado and ego, especially around people in tech. Everybody wants to be the best. Nobody wants to be seen as not knowing or being a little bit dumb on certain topics. But
Yeah, and so creating Google did a really interesting study a couple of years ago. Google, like everybody else, has high performance teams and low performance teams. Google, unlike everyone else, has a ton of money, and they spend a bunch and they study everything. And so they set up a team. They set up a whole team, a whole project to study their high performance teams and their low performance teams, expecting that it was going to have something to do with team makeup. Maybe it would be diversity or lack of diversity, or maybe it would be 10x developers, or maybe it would be some percentage of 10x developers. And they discovered that it wasn't any of those things. It was this phrase, this term that's now become quite popular, mainly as a result of the Google study, which is psychological safety. And psychological safety is the comfort to say something that might be considered to be stupid. I don't know. I'm just trying to make a contribution, and I feel safe enough to make that contribution, even if it turns out to not be a smart thing to do, not to be a smart thing to say.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies fail to provide that safe environment, and I've definitely been in retros and things where points have been raised and people feel that they have to defend themselves.
Yeah, there's finger pointing.
Yeah.
Not a good thing.
No, it's definitely not. And people, I think, become more shielded, more sort of self-preserving in those industries, in those situations, and you don't push forward, you don't expand, and you don't get the best out of the team either.
That's right.
So you often see these sort of environments that have come from waterfall environments, as you said, micromanaged, and these waterfall environments maybe have spent 2, 3, 4 years working on a project, come up to delivery date, either not delivered what they wanted to deliver, or the customer just hasn't liked what they've delivered. And the company goes back to the tech teams, be that the developers, be that everybody who was building the software, and beat them around the head with it. And the team becomes very scarred and worried about the outcomes of projects, and they don't feel safe. But have you got any words of wisdom how developers can try and heal those wounds?
Well, first of all, what you're speaking to is really a management issue. Clearly, managers have to support their teams, protect their teams, and a variety of other things. So if they find themselves in a situation where that's not the case, it's typically a management issue, and there are various ways in dealing with that. But one of the ways to not work for that manager anymore. We find that most people actually don't leave companies; they leave managers, for that reason. So often when there are problems in the software development process, it comes down to a management problem more than anything else.
That first one is change your job or change your job. So that is, if you can't get positive change, then find somewhere else to work that has that positive change for you. And the second point was, I've been into companies where they've had a lot of developers and people leaving the teams, and they've either tried throwing money at the team members, they've promised the earth, and what they've never realised is that, as you rightly said, people leave because of the managers. I've worked for teams where the team itself was fantastic, but it was the upper management or the middle management that were a problem, and they wouldn't change. And the only option really was for me to move on.
So one of the things that is true pretty much across the board in software development organizations is that managers have had very little training in managing. most of us became managers because we were good coders. And somebody said, "Oh, well, you're really good at this software stuff, and so you must be able to manage some other people who are doing it. Why don't we make you the manager?" And there's this notion that we muscled our way through all of these hard software problems. Surely we can just muscle our way through learning to manage. And I think to some extent we can, but the cost, particularly, I look back at my first days managing, and I'm sorry for the teams that worked for me in those first days. It was I was still learning to manage, and I had zero training at the point at which I became a manager, and that's common for about 95% of software development managers have had zero training in management at the point at which they become managers. It's one of the reasons that Mickey and I wrote Managing the Unmanageable was because there are also very few books on managing programmers. And we thought that it would be really useful, one, to gather together a collection of the rules of thumb and nuggets of wisdom that we use in managing, as well as to share some of the learning and School of Hard Knocks kind of learnings that we've had around what it takes to manage effectively and to create teams that are joyful and that are happy and that are effective and that are productive and that create great software that delights customers.
Yeah, yeah, sure. And I think a lot of software developers don't have the personal skills needed to be a manager, or a leader, more than a manager. As I prefer to try and lead teams rather than manage them. I think it's a slightly different take on the sort of ethos of being a
Yeah,
manager.
I think it
And
requires us to do both of those things. We need to lead, but there are management activities that our companies expect us to do on behalf of the company as well. And there's a third one, which is coaching, and coaching our people is a
yeah,
is a third area that we could call out separate from leading and from managing.
It's really a triumvirate. To be a great leader, you have to be a good manager, and you have to be a good coach. To be a good
sure,
manager, you don't have to be
sure.
a great leader
And I
necessarily,
think Ron,
but if you want to be
you
a great leader,
you
you
said
want
that
to
you felt
be
sorry
able to
for
manage
the
and
teams
coach as well.
that you managed early on, and I do sort of agree with that from my own experiences as well. Some of the things that I look back and I did and I said, and the ways that I tried to solve problems were probably not the best way to have done them. But you as long as you learn from those mistakes and help people going forward and improve yourself, I think it's a natural learning curve. It's one of those things you can't
I think
avoid.
it requires us to shift our learning. We've been, as programmers, I think we're almost to a one. We're really deep learners about technology, but becoming a manager requires shifting that learning focus to people and really learning how to manage people, how to lead people, and how to coach people is a whole different skill set that probably we haven't given a whole lot of focus to up to this point, but now we need to, and we really need to focus on that to become good at it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So for the tech teams out there, for the developers that are listening and that maybe have a boss that is hard to approach, um, what words of advice would you give them about approaching their line managers when things aren't quite going right, when maybe what they've been asked to do isn't possible, because that can be quite scary.
I think for starters, they should try to open the lines of communication long before they have to communicate. This goes for being a manager, and it goes for being an individual contributor as well.
Yeah, I guess
have to manage your
if somebody's
manager a little
not
bit
not
too,
approachable
and be
when
able
everything
to talk to them
is
when
happy
things are
path,
going right. If you can't talk to them when
when
they're going
things are really
right, you
going wrong
can't
and
talk to them
everybody's
when they're going
stressed out,
wrong.
it's going to be even worse.
Yeah, we talking to Mickey. I think you're really dead on. We talk in our book about experiences that we've had and learnings that we've gotten from the standpoint of as a manager, you need to be able to collaborate across the organization. You need to be able to collaborate with HR. You need to be able to collaborate with product management. You need to be able to collaborate with other engineering managers. You probably need to be able to collaborate with sales and marketing, depending on how big the company is. Whether that's whether there's somebody who's an intermediator or an intermediary for sales and marketing. You're gonna be collaborating across that organization, and you don't want to go to HR at the point at which you've got an HR problem. You want to make that relationship with HR early. Similarly, you want to do that with the engineering management colleagues that you've got in your organization. Similarly, your product management colleagues, and similarly your team. We as managers want to form really solid relationships before issues come up, so that we've got that channel of communication when they do.
Yeah, because without that communication there that you talked about, you're not a team. You're not working as a team effectively at all.
We have a rule of thumb that says that in software development we can't over communicate, and I want to caveat communication that we have two ears and one mouth, and we need to communicate in that ratio. We need to listen about at least 2/3 of the time and speak only a third of the time at most. And if we do it that way, I don't think we can over communicate.
Sure. So we talked about your book there, Managing the Unmanageable. Is that aimed at management only, or is that something that developers could pick up and learn from?
Certainly, any developer. So it is targeted toward managing and leading and coaching developers. So any developer who's thinking, I want to be a leader, and you don't have to be you don't have to have the title of manager to be a leader. There are lots of, and in fact, Agile counts on every developer to be a leader. It's just the leadership passes back and forth on a self-organizing team, pretty much transparently and fluidly, especially within a culture of psychological safety. One of the things that Google said about those teams with psychological safety was that you could observe it. You could literally watch a team, and every person on the team would speak about the same amount of time. There was equal turn taking in speaking on those kinds of teams, and that means that everybody's stepping up to lead, and that means that leadership is a learned skill.
Okay. So if the listeners out there wanted to learn more about why projects fail and how to stop them from failing, are there any resources that you would point them to, or you could recommend?
There are all too few books on managing and leading programming teams. When our book, when Managing the Unmanageable, came out, we believe that it's the seventh book in the history of software development and the history of programming, which started back in the 1940s during World War II. We believe our book was the seventh when it came out just 7 years ago. Since then, there are a few more, but there are not very many, and they're all. I think each one of them contributes value, particularly when there's a few. There are certainly a ton of books, and they're not all good, but there are a ton of books on Agile and on how we work together and collaborate together as Agile teams and as Scrum teams and as Kanban teams and as extreme programming teams, and that kind of thing.
Not to mention all of the vast volume of books on project management and just plain management. But we think that managing programmers is slightly different than just managing, factory workers. We think that there's special skills involved and special tools that you need to use, whether they're physical tools or mental tools that you can apply to take and be a more successful manager. And of course, if you're a more successful manager, you're going to have more successful projects.
And managing programmers is different from managing hardware engineers or mechanical engineers or aeronautical engineers. Programmers there's definitely an engineering component to programming, but there's also an art component to programming that is akin to music, to being a musician, that's akin to being an artist, that's akin to being a craftsperson. And so there's a lot of we can think about coming into programming as, yeah, we can learn it in school, but there's much more of a craft to it, much more of apprenticeship that applies to programming than anything else that gets called engineering. It gets called software engineering, but it's only partially software engineering.
Sure. So yeah, it is definitely an art form. I come from a graphic design background originally. It's what got me into programming. So I do like the arty side of development, because you are creating something. And my brother is still a graphic designer, and he does laugh when I tell him, look at this. This is elegant code. The way it flows, the way it's padded and it's indented, and the way that it all fits together. And he just laughs at me for that, because he can't see it, because it's not all pretty colors and nice pictures.
Yep.
But we're almost out of time. So, are there any last words of wisdom that you would give to the listeners to help them to stop their projects from failing before we end for today?
Well, those people who are managing those projects and those people who are managing those people need to stay focused on learning the characteristics of management and leadership and coaching, and I think that's really fundamental. We need to get and learning the nuances of process as well. So as a agile trainer, I run into teams all the time that as I said, that say they're agile and to a very minimal extent really are agile, or they're doing many of the practices but not actually being agile, and not doing their practices very effectively, because they're not thinking about the understanding that underlies why this stuff works. And so we really need to focus not just on the technology, not just on the code, not just on the output, but on our process, and then really focus on delighting our customers.
So on a more practical basis, I guess that when we embarked upon creating this book we wrote, we have been gratified by the fact that many people have written reviews for us and given us feedback that they had wished they had this when they started managing their software projects. And we're especially gratified right now. Our publisher has just created a second edition of our book, in which we've gone back and updated a lot of the agile information into it, and updated some of the terminology and so forth to make it much more current, even though it was only 7 years old. Things move fast in the technology world. So we hope that it fulfills its role as we originally intended, as a kind of a mentor on your bookshelf for, if you're a manager, what do you do with these crazy software people.
Yeah, definitely. These very special snowflakes, these temperamental developers that we have in our teams. Definitely, it's definitely a book that I will be picking up and thumbing through, and also recommending. And if anybody wants to find out more about the book, or more about Ron and Mickey, I will include all the links in the show notes as well. So that really sort of wraps things up, and it leaves me just to say thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's very, very nice.
Yeah, it was a privilege. It definitely was. And thank you to everybody out there listening and for tuning in today. You've been listening to The Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Ron and Mickey talking about why projects fail. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help The Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.